hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 188, and we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Paul, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. I'm just overly excited.
Is there Eurovision in the air?
Whoa!
The best part of Paul Bestall's year that isn't a Super Bowl.
Yes, or to do with birthdays.
So there's a cluster of things which form the center of Paul Bestall's soul.
Eurovision is deeply in there, yes.
Yeah, like the infinity gauntlet of Paul's soul.
Yeah.
I would say that the Eurovision is like the soul stone.
Oh, yes, certainly is. I mean, we've got a couple of screaming entries this year.
Screaming?
Yeah, just people screaming a lot. Ireland have finally got back in after failing to qualify for the last 5 years. They've got in because they've sent somebody who looks as though they're channeling a witch, Bambi Thug. And then Slovakia's entry featured a woman wearing very little, shall we say, like a see-through body stocking, apart from some strategically placed bits, which started to glow up halfway through. Croatia, that's a good one. Baby lasagna.
I am certain you're just making these names up to prank me. Who's your odds-on favorite, or do you have one yet?
I think the Croatians have got a very good chance. We've got outside chance, I think. We should certainly, hopefully, get back to the top 10. Italy and Spain have had renaissances recently. They've done very well. Italy, I mean, obviously won it recently. They had the kite on for a while because they finished, I think they finished bottom one year. They just said, no, we'll pay for it, but we're not entering.
Classic Italian move. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home.
Yeah, but they still paid. Because you got to pay
just
for
to
it.
prove that they could. They just don't want to. We could have win. We just don't want to. No, I'm Italian. I get it. Because if you don't pay, people might think you don't have enough money.
Yeah.
I've had nothing so interesting going on as Eurovision. I'm back from Victoria. I'm back in Ontario. And for the second story show in a row, I am just coming off another 5-hour conversation for Where Did the Road Go?
Whoa.
That will be coming out, I think, soon. Part 1 will be out soon. I know it's the first part's already available for patrons, but yeah. So that was a really good time. And I've been looking forward to this episode because on this episode, we are sharing the second half of Meghan's story. This is This Haunted Life Part 2. And we had a lot of great feedback about the first part of Meghan's story. Meghan, of course, is one of our new listeners who sent in a very lengthy accounting of her lifelong experiences with the paranormal. And again, we shared the first half on episode 187. We'll be sharing the second half here on 188. And I'm very excited to get to it. But before we do that, of course, we got to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. For real, guys, ads don't really pay the bills. They help, but patrons are really who allow the show to continue. Patrons, of course, and our Apple Podcast subscribers. So while we'd like to thank all those fine folks, we would especially like to thank the latest ones. They are
Charlie Whale,
James,
Carl K,
Nancy Whittington Coates,
Lindsay Bradish Banks,
Ultre,
Sasha Sloan,
Sai Soy Candles,
and Joel H.
Again, guys, thank you so much from the bottom of our terrible hearts. Every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are. But patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers are truly the ones who allow the show to continue. Without you guys, there wouldn't be a Ghost Story Guys. So thank you again. And if you want to join the team, we'll tell you at the end of the show about all the cool stuff you get. But we will say, for $1 a month through Patreon, you get an ad-free feed. Who doesn't want that? Ads suck. If you want to join that sweet community and help support the show, help keep the show going, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Again, that's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys, or sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts. One last thing before we get to Meghan's story. Shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and musician Harper Smith. You can find more of Harper's work at rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts on music streaming platforms everywhere. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with part 2 of This Haunted Life. Welcome back, and now we begin part 2 of Meghan's story. And again, if you haven't heard part 1, this is not going to make much sense without it, so if you're a new listener, hello, and make sure to listen to This Haunted Life part 1, episode 187. But for everyone else, on with the story. To this day, I don't know if the darkness was always there, or if it became dark after how much hardship and angst we experienced in that house. Did the thing in the basement feed off our sadness, swallow it whole and demand more? Or was it waiting for the right moment to pounce? I haven't the slightest clue, but it was there and wouldn't take long for us to notice. When I'd come home from school, I'd be tired like any other teenager. The homework load was a lot, and usually took me 5 to 6 hours to complete, so I had to get started right away. I gotta say, Paul, that is an inhuman amount of homework.
I once went 6 months, I didn't do any. I thought, no, I'm not doing it. Don't like it. It's boring.
That was more or less my approach to it as well. I just feel like 5 to 6 hours of homework. I don't think like literacy rates have not improved by after giving kids 5 to 6 hours of homework. I just don't understand the point. I know that's early in the story to stop, but that really jumped out at me. That's too much fucking homework. One day I made my way to the couch while my mom cooked dinner. I still had my Catholic school uniform on and fell asleep without changing first. My mom woke me up 4 hours later. This happened more and more, and soon I ended up staying home after not feeling well in the mornings. I'd go back to sleep, only for my mom to wake me up 13 hours later. I had no energy for a long time. It wouldn't be until years later that I learned that sometimes spirits or ghosts can feed off your energy if you weren't careful. I don't know if this was the case, but it was scary how drained I would be all the time in that house. And it only added to the terror we felt while we spent our last years there. One summer night, I was up late and reading a book in my room with a cat curled up in my lap. It was a normal night until I heard the first creak of a hardwood floor. I lowered my gaze from my book, listening. The townhouse was 3 levels, with our bedrooms at the top level. The footsteps continued above me, creaking the hardwood floor. All our floors were carpeted in the house, and the only room above mine was the attic. The attic was extremely small and with low egress. A child wouldn't have been able to crawl inside of the room, or so my mother told me. I never saw inside the attic, and to my knowledge we did not keep anything up there since it was such a small space. Nonetheless, the footsteps, which sounded like heavy boots, walked around. I unglued my eyes from the ceiling and down to my cat, who was also craning her neck at the footsteps. She looked at me as if waiting to see what action I was going to take. All I managed to do was stay firmly where I was and hope that whoever was walking around up there didn't make their way down, since my room was directly next to the attic door. Soon the footsteps dredged over to the attic door. I was frozen in my spot, my legs asleep, and my cat watching the ceiling. After the footsteps paced over to the other side of the attic, it was gone. I listened for what had to be 15 minutes. Nothing. It was quiet. My cat jumped down from my bed and opened my door. Another, I kid you not, moment. She would reach her paw under the door and shimmy it open all the time. And I figured it was safe to turn off my light and try to get some sleep. It was the only time I heard footsteps above my head. Some months later, in the dead of an early winter's night, I woke with a start. I gasped, clutching the blankets. Not a split second after I woke, a deafening crash of glass reverberated from the basement. My dad jumped up from my parents' room across the hall and raced downstairs. Somehow, amidst the commotion, I went back to sleep and woke up in time to see a police car out front and my parents talking to an officer outside my window. It was a gray morning, and the officer happened to look up towards my window. I hid behind the curtain, remembering what had happened only hours before. My parents had heard it too, and my dad had immediately inspected the basement for any signs of a break-in or vandalism, but nothing was amiss. No broken glass, nothing misplaced or rearranged. It was as if the noise itself was a phantom. Even the police officer checked around the property and found nothing. I've always wondered why I woke up mere milliseconds before it happened, and why it never happened again. I'm grateful it wasn't a regular occurrence, but somehow it seemed scarier that way. Just before we move on, this reminded me of a story, probably one of the more well-known stories we've done in this show, The Curious Case of Bumblebuzz from October 2019. And it reminded me that after they had, and we'll probably revisit the story on a future episode just to sort of freshen it up for people. And I know the original experiencer reached out a couple of years ago saying they would be interested in sort of doing a follow-up. So hopefully you're still listening. And I'm still interested in having that conversation. I'm just very bad at email. After they exorcised the spirit, as I recall, they had similar issues in the basement, because the basement was one of the places this thing would come for him. Let's see if I can find it here. I'm just trying to find... Yes. We did as we were told and went out for the evening, came home and closed everything up. Well, you can probably guess about what time at night noises started coming out of the basement. The basement was a full woodworker's paradise with cabinets and vices and shelves. I tell you, it sounded like every door and shelf was being slammed, open and closed. It was terrifying to lie in bed in the middle of the night just to hear anger being exuded. I texted the shaman, and the shaman had helped them get rid of this thing first thing in the morning, and he told me to just hold tight another night and to make sure I hadn't locked a raccoon or cat in who might have wandered in when we were told to leave the doors open. And above all else, I was not to go into that basement without a man who loved me. And the next night it happened again. So there's this interesting sort of connection between these kinds of hauntings and these expressions of rage through violent sounds. They never actually saw physical signs of there being anything damaged in that story as well, but there is very much this expression of a very, very frightening rage.
Mm.
One cold Saturday morning after that, I was rubbing the sleep out of my eyes and making my way downstairs to the bathroom across from the kitchen. This bathroom was directly above the basement, the non-spooky half, and right next to the basement door. There was no heat in that bathroom, and it matched whatever the weather outside was at the time. It was winter, so the floors were glacier cold, and so was the toilet. As I sat down to do my business, a booming crash shook the entire floor of the bathroom. At the time, only my sister was awake, and she was in her room. No one would ever be down in the basement that early. I sat and listened. I was certain there was an early morning intruder downstairs with a knife, and it would only be a matter of time before they walked up those stairs and found me in the bathroom. I washed my hands and tiptoed to the kitchen. I grabbed the largest, thickest knife I could find and had 911 ready to dial on my phone. I don't know why I didn't run upstairs and get my mom or dad or sister. It was my instinct at the time. I listened for 10 minutes and heard nothing moving around downstairs, and when I didn't hear anyone coming up the stairs to kill me, I put the knife away and told my sister what happened. My mom happened to be waking up and coming out of her room when she exclaimed, "You too?" The previous night, my mom and dad had been in the living room watching television late at night. They heard a big crash in the basement and immediately went to the door to listen. My mother was ready to call the police.
Unlike me, they both heard voices downstairs. From what they could make out, two men were asking each other questions about the brand new grill my dad had bought for the upcoming summer. My mother said it was quite clear they were from another era by the questions they asked. They didn't know where a grill was. Dad went to go inspect the basement and found nothing awry. When I asked my dad later, he admitted to hearing something, but was mum on the rest of the subject. Now he's more open about what he heard that night, and it turned out that wasn't the first time something like this had happened.
And just to jump in there, Paul, I actually had that experience. We probably talked about it, but I had that experience years ago in Victoria. I was in bed, and Nick was asleep. I was kind of just trying to get to sleep, and I heard what sounded like two young girls, maybe in their teens, in the living room, talking about the movies on my shelf.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it was. I think it was The Illusionist. I had a DVD copy of the film The Illusionist, and they were trying to say the name. It was the weirdest thing, and I think I got up and checked, and of course there was no one there. But
that you could see.
Well, okay, yeah, that is fair. That is fair. Thanks for that.
It's okay. Settle you down nicely, that.
But pardon me, as you were.
Thank you. Years earlier, before their separation, my parents were in the basement watching television when my mum just happened to look to her left at the fireplace. She held her breath. 2 Union soldiers stood by the fireplace looking around, seemingly confused. She shook my dad's arm and he looked over, seeing them as well. They watched them for what was a mere 3 seconds before the soldiers looked back at them too. Instantly they vanished. My mum wondered if it was the same soldiers that had come back and stumbled upon the grill, even more confused than the last time. I don't remember exactly when, but the house became dark quickly after we returned. We had financial hardship after financial hardship, and my parents were fighting constantly. My sister had gone off to college in New York, and I was alone to deal with it all. One day, we found out that my dad had been laid off both of his jobs, and we were strapped until he could find a new one. Some days my mum couldn't even afford the gas to take us to school. My sister didn't have enough to sign up for another semester of college, and it was looking like both of us might have forfeited our education just to keep a roof over our heads. That's when the oppressiveness started. As all of this swirled around us, it felt heavy to move around the house. I felt like I couldn't breathe sometimes, like something was sitting on my chest, and I had to fight to breathe correctly. I also became lethargic and withdrawn. Weird things started happening around the house, especially to my mum. When I was at school, she felt that she was not alone, and the presence was menacing. She didn't go downstairs at all, not until someone else was at home with her. One day, before she picked me up from school, she was taking a nap. She was almost asleep when she felt the mattress start to rise on the other side. She thought she was imagining things until she started to tip off the bed. When she realised what was happening, she ran out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house. She took a drive, came back, and blasted holy music to feel safe in the house. After that, praise and gospel music would be playing 24/7, and nobody fought against the notion. Spending time in that house was like having all the energy sucked from you and then some. Because of the financial situation, I made the decision to drop out of high school and go to public school. My parents were crushed, as they wanted to give me the best education possible, and it was a tradition for my dad to send his kids to Catholic high school. But then we couldn't afford my schooling, and my sister's college tuition, so I dropped out, and a miracle loan came through for my sister to stay in college. The day I dropped out, I was crying non-stop, and so was my mother. I felt like I had to be strong for her, so she wouldn't feel bad for what she couldn't do for me, so I pretended I was okay, and never really processed my feelings around what happened. I sank deep into depression. I was in no mental state to start public school, so my parents decided I'd be homeschooled. It took months to get the money for my homeschooling program. Every day I laid on the couch crying and got intense headaches. The house was always overcast and gloomy. But one positive did come out of the situation. In between my schooling, I'd begun to teach myself Korean, since I'd recently got into K-pop music and found a new passion for languages. About 2 years passed like this. I was in and out of schooling because I was so depressed most of the time I could barely get myself to shower or brush my teeth, never less do schoolwork. We made yet another attempt at asking our landlord to fix the gigantic hole in the wall that dripped water and was infested with black mould. The landlord said no and raised the rent. It was clear he wanted to...
What a son of a bitch. That pisses me off so much. Like the fact, I mean, there's a lot about the story that bothers me, Megan. I'm so sorry that you're an adult, you moved through this, but like the fact that you couldn't express your emotions without worrying about how it would affect other people. I feel that so fucking hard, and it's just such a drag. It's just so shitty. And now this landlord who should be fired out of a fucking cannon.
Yep.
Like, I'm not opposed to landlords as a concept. I know some people think there just shouldn't be landlords, and I think that's pushing it, because some people, myself included, don't want to deal with the hassle of home ownership, because I've been a homeowner and I know what a fucking pain it is. But predatory landlords should 100% be part of our first man mission to the sun.
Send them anywhere in outer space if they don't have a suit.
That's true. I like the finality of the sun.
Okay.
It's like burning trash. It's just satisfying. I like fire, Paul. This is probably not good.
Okay. Yes.
What's your address again? How many dry things do you own?
I don't know. Lots at the moment. I've done lots of washing this week.
I'm kidding. I would never set your house on fire.
Thank God.
Just to be clear, just in case anyone's wondering, like, that's weird. Did he just threaten to burn Paul's house down? No, I'm just kidding.
Not today.
Not today. But remember.
Arson is always an option.
I did this thing once. I like candles, and I used to use little tea lights in the bathroom in our first apartment.
Yes.
And what I would do is after the match was out, I would just drop it in the wax. And so what happened is there's a bunch of wood and wax in this little tea light cup. And of course, eventually it all just caught fire. It wasn't a candle anymore. It was a tiny little bonfire. And so I thought, well, that's bad. I don't really know how to deal with this. So I put my hand under the tap and I dripped water on top of it because I thought water plus fire. So that did not go the way I'd hoped. And what happened next, as it's described by my lovely wife, is I heard a sound that sounded like ripping paper. And then I heard you go, whoa. And basically the water dripped into the fire and it just whooshed up in my face and singed my eyebrows.
When dealing with oil-based fires, use a wet cloth.
So I didn't understand this was oil-based fire. I get now wax, fire. Okay, I get it now. You know, in retrospect, this is about 12 years ago.
What you needed was a series of children's public service announcements that made you terrified of everything.
Can they be really ominous and, just flavored with the possibility of death?
Oh, yeah, there'll always be like facial scares. Like the fireworker. Don't throw fireworks at people. Ah! And then you see him, he's got no eyes.
That's how Madam Web
down
ends,
the street.
So. For real. That's how they blind her with fireworks.
Well, clearly a big fan of British public service announcements in the 70s.
Well, they're vastly more interesting than Madam Web. So apologies if anyone involved with the production of that film is listening, but you know.
Yeah, hi, Dakota.
Yeah, you were great. I appreciated her on the press tour for that film. She didn't give a fuck. Didn't give a fuck.
Good for her.
Exactly.
She was in the brilliant remake of Suspiria, wasn't she? So she's allowed a free hit.
Oh, she was too. I really like that movie. I think you and I are in a minority, though.
That's better than the original, I think, because there isn't that mysterious room with barbed wire kept in a dance school.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, I assume most I don't know. The Magdalene Laundries have taught me not to rule anything out when it comes to institutions that involve children. But the thing that really weirds me out about Suspiria when I watch it now, the original, and I like it. Yeah, don't get me wrong. It's a classic. But knowing that Argento had originally intended the film to be about little girls, and they have the doors are built in such a way to make the actresses seem smaller, that's weird. I'm uncomfortable with that. I am increasingly uncomfortable watching Dario Argento's films as I get older because I think he was working through something. Or rather, I don't necessarily think he was working through it. I think he was just expressing it in front of everyone.
I feel like this, and so you can too.
Yeah. Like I remember we'll get right back to Meghan's story in a sec here, guys. But I mean, I remember I watched Trauma, and his daughter Asia is in it. She was 16 at the time. There's a really porny nude scene with a 16-year-old girl. What the fuck, man? How do you sit at your little writer's desk in Italy and go, and now my daughter will take off her top without stopping and saying, oh, maybe I'm the problem.
Probably what gave her that X-ray vision that she uses so well in Triple X.
Oh, I forgot that she was in Triple X. Yes.
I've tried to forget Triple X as much as I can.
Have you seen Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage?
I've no intention. The first one was bad enough.
Yeah.
So then recast it. Is it Ice Cube in the second one?
State of the Union is Ice Cube, and then the third one, it's Vin Diesel again.
What?
I could do a whole podcast on The Return of Xander Cage. We won't. We'll get back to Megan's story, but
if sometimes scene in. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, if you ever want to enjoy some herbal refreshment and just turn your brain off, check that one out.
Okay. The first one, I was just laughing at how bad it was constantly and how poor the CGI was. But the bit where she sees him on the bridge, where she stood, where she can't see where he is, and she just points and goes, look, there he is. What? You can't see him.
It's the Howling 3 all over again.
It's not that bad. She's at the other side of the bridge, and he's next to the bridge, so there's no way, unless she's got X-ray vision, she can't see it.
I guess it's a little known fact that Italians have X-ray vision. They're just constantly looking under everyone's clothes. Biology, look it up. Just wait till I get a chance to edit Wikipedia first.
Okay.
Anyways, sorry, Megan, back to your story.
It was clear he wanted us out, and after some convincing, my dad agreed that it was time to move. Now, because this landlord was a dick, he decided to evict us and give us 30 days to move out. I don't know if the landlord knew we wanted to move or not, but it was still a gut punch that we did not need. So while my dad worked, my mum and I surfed the internet for cheap apartments. I helped my mum pack and we were able to get a lot done together. It was an extremely stressful time though. Every day the clock was ticking for us to pack up our valuables, and my dad was so upset at not being able to keep the townhouse and my Catholic schooling. He didn't help start packing until the last 2 weeks of the deadline. Luckily, at the 11th hour, we found an apartment. We scooped it up and moved into it fast. Things still happened around the house, but the most intense of them all was when my mum was in the kitchen and a vase was thrown at her. It just missed her, but she was so shaken it made us pack even faster. And to make it worse, during one of our most stifling summers, the central air conditioning broke out of the blue. For some reason or another, they couldn't even get it fixed, and my dad was forced to rent out an AC unit to stick in our living room window. We could only afford to rent one, so we had a whole AC unit to cool down 3 floors of a house. At the time, I think I remember my mum and I talking about the house wanting us to get out, especially with the AC breaking all of a sudden. My mum and I packed fast and always stuck together. Even my dad never really let himself be alone.
We moved across the street to a sprawling apartment cul-de-sac. It was the only apartment we could get at the time, and we were eager to move. The first time I went over there with my mom after we rented it, the energy difference was night and day. I hadn't realized how dark and oppressive the townhouse had gotten. When I stepped inside the apartment, it was as if I was breathing clearly for the first time. The atmosphere was bright and clean, as if someone gave the place a good spiritual scrubbing. After a few hours of moving some stuff in, we had to go back to Crossbow Court. Walking back into the townhouse, my mood immediately dampened. I didn't want to be there anymore, and coupled with my heavy depression, I had to push myself to finish packing things up. My dad was very emotional, especially for him, those last few days of packing at the townhouse. I wasn't used to seeing him like that. He always hid his inner emotions, and I'd only seen him cry twice growing up. It was a very emotional and stressful last few weeks in that place. It seemed only fitting for what the townhouse had turned into. We packed up everything we wanted to take, but by the end of it, the basement was largely left intact and unpacked. It didn't matter. No one wanted to go down there anyways, and it was mainly junk that had accumulated. Good. Fuck that landlord. Leave it for him to clean up. The last day I was in the townhouse, the darkness that had been like a curtain in that place, surrounding it in its oppressiveness, was lifted perhaps only briefly. The house was being overrun by nature. The weeds in our front and backyard climbed its way over and around the property. Spiders of many colors dangled from corners and from the refrigerator. It was the size of a quarter and white. I decided then I was not as thirsty as I thought I was and turned right back around upstairs when I saw that spider. Yeah, I would too, Megan. And by this point in the murky, swamp-like humidity, our air conditioning had long since broken down. Stifling and sad, this is what my childhood home had turned into. I didn't feel or see any looming presence while we packed. Whatever was there let us pack in peace. The paint peeled off the walls. A huge hole in the wall that exposed black mold from the upstairs shower dripped rhythmically. The rented air-conditioned unit sputtered lukewarm air into the now-empty living room. 1926 Crossbow Court was sad and falling apart. And now we were free of it. And I just want to pause here for a second, because I do think that you can sometimes draw a through line between the mood in a place and how well the place is taken care of. And obviously, you guys are tenants, Megan, so you cannot be expected to make those kinds of repairs. It is unreasonable to expect that. But I know Bocce's, the store where, a lot of my early stories come from. When I went back to visit it, after we had sold that, well, we didn't own it, but after we were no longer running the store and after the owner of the building had sold the building, it felt completely different. And I kind of think it's because the previous owner, who's a really good guy, but he just didn't put any money into shoring up the building. He just kind of used it as is. And whereas the new owner, she put probably about $500,000 into the building, which I think was more than she paid for it, if I'm honest. And it really changed the tenor of the place. And I do sometimes wonder, like if the places have personalities, and if you put more into it, then it responds in kind. I don't know. I mean, and I say, if that's true, then again, this is like nothing you guys could have affected, because I think it's ridiculous to expect tenants to make material improvements to the location beyond maybe painting or, possibly replacing things they've broken if they were irresponsible. But yeah, what do you think?
I certainly believe that houses do have personality and can mirror the events that have gone on in them and go on throughout their lifestyle. I mean, you hear so many stories about certain houses and places giving off bad vibes and strange impressions and people just feeling creeped out. I think sometimes you go to those houses and that even on a bright summer's day, it'll still feel cold inside. It's almost as if there's a different atmosphere that the building wants to give off. And I suppose it depends on the energy of the people that are in there, because it can be a two-way street that maybe, as Meghan's referring to, was the house feeding off her, or was she feeding off the house? Was it a two-way street that she wasn't aware of? And was that responsible for it? And I think most of us who have had bad times in our lives can certainly attract some of the negativity that we were going through to perhaps where we live or the personal situation. They are intrinsically tied to where we live.
Yeah. And I mean, I know, it sounds like the financial struggles they were going through, that changes the atmosphere of a place, right? Like that.
Oh, every day is pressure.
Yeah. Like when money is tight for me, which, is not infrequently, because I decided to be a full-time podcaster because, I'm bad at other jobs. It really affects the space. And I know it can affect other people in that space. And so I think there's sort of a symbiotic relationship between person and place. Like I think there are sometimes locations which cause negativity, but I sometimes wonder if there's also like you're sort of on a path and you end up in a place that is equal to the path you're on.
Yes.
So if you are if you're headed in a down direction, there's sort of that law of attraction thing. And I struggle with that because I don't want it to sound like I think people deserve their fates, because they don't. I mean, some people do. Some people like these shitty landlords. When he lands on the sun and him and Elon just explode into cinders, they'll have earned that. But I don't like the notion that people deserve their suffering. I think that's not great. But I do wonder if sometimes what we're kind of, our trajectories take us closer to things that are more likely within our space.
Oh, very much so. I think if you're not feeling good, you find yourself dealing and indulging in more negative behaviours and situations, speaking from personal experience. Yeah,
there you go.
It's been a long time since I found myself in a crack house at 2 in the morning, I'll tell you that.
2-3 weeks at the very least.
I've been once this month.
Well, that's my plan for when we finally get you over here, so, ghost hunting in a crack house at 2 in the morning.
Nothing new.
There's a couple in my neighborhood, so we can go.
There's one around here somewhere. I don't know where it is. I just see people staggering down the street at weird
Yikes.
times.
There used to be one just at the end of the block from our apartment in Victoria. I remember I used to hang out with this guy, except we used to work together at the Ministry of Education, and I'd go visit him at his place. And yeah, he was the only one who took care of his place. Everything else, the woman who owned the house, her daughter lived in the basement. The daughter sold crack. So all the other apartments were kind of similarly occupied. So it was always a bit of a challenge going there. You never knew what you were going to get. And now there's, deluxe condos, and I always like to remind the people who own them that there used to be a crack house here. So let's not get too pleased with ourselves.
The house that crack built.
I think that's the Ford family crest here in Ontario. All right. After we settled into the new apartment, it was rough financially and emotionally for a while. The lack of money was still an issue, and we barely had any food. We had no Wi-Fi, and the electricity would go out when the bill wasn't paid. It was a very dark time. I was also the first person in my family to outwardly show symptoms of mental illness. This was way before the mental health revolution, if you will, where now it's talked about freely and has a little less stigma. My mom and dad questioned my strange habits or compulsions, and it wouldn't be until years later that I learned I had self-soothed and brought myself out of OCD. I mean, good for you for self-soothing and bringing yourself out of it, although I'm sorry you had to go through that. I also had my first panic attack about a year into the new place. My parents and the doctors didn't take too kindly to the anxiety prognosis and wanted to send me to specialists to figure out why I felt like my throat was closing every time I woke up. Turns out I was just afraid of having another panic attack and would therefore be triggered into another panic attack every time I woke. Finally, I got some medication to help me with my anxiety, and it looked up from there. Did I ever tell you, Paul, about the first time I ever had an anxiety attack?
No, you did not.
Okay, so I'll just tell really quick. So it's kind of darkly funny now in retrospect.
Okay.
I was 7 or 8, something like that. And my grandparents were out of town. They had a satellite dish. It was during the first Gulf War. So my grandparents were out of town. They had a satellite dish. My dad would go there to watch wrestling, pay-per-view wrestling. So I went with him because I also liked wrestling. For the wrestling fans out there, it was the WrestleMania where Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan went up against each other, whichever one that was. I could look it up, but I refuse. Yeah, Paul is shaking his head. Yeah. I don't know. It doesn't matter.
I'm not a loser. I don't know that.
Ryan Sprague takes off his headphones and sadly walks away.
Get body slammed by Ryan and Kev.
I was going to say, yeah, they're both coming for you.
Bring them on, losers. Like me getting excited about pantomime.
Oh, we're gonna have to. Mom and Dad are gonna have to fight about this one, kids. But we'll fight about it later. But yeah, so we were going there to watch wrestling, and now Revelstoke, of course, has our famous dam, our hydroelectric dam, and there were soldiers stationed there during the first Gulf War. And I remember asking my dad, I said, "Why are there soldiers at the dam?" And without looking away from the television, Paul, he says to me, "Oh, just in case someone tries to blow it up with a missile." What? Could they fire a missile all the way over from Iraq? The answer is no. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, they could. Yeah." Back to watching TV. I sat there and I realized now I had an anxiety attack. That's what I had. I went out of my tiny little mind just thinking, oh my God, at any moment the dam could be vaporized. And if the dam gets vaporized, Revelstoke is gonzo. Like when we were kids, we actually did dam evacuation drills, which is hilarious because the only thing that you can do if the dam burst all of a sudden is kiss your ass goodbye.
Run up.
You wouldn't have time.
You can try.
Well, that's what they had us doing. But they had us like doing these orderly walks. And I was like, why the fuck are we doing this? We're just going to be outside so we can see the wall of water coming for us. This is not inspiring.
Water does not care on manners.
No, it truly does not. But yeah, so that was my first ever anxiety attack. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, I don't know why you were worried about it. The Russians are far closer. They could have just obliterated half the western coast with an intercontinental ballistic missile. What were they teaching you at school? They should have made you watch Threads.
Honestly, if I had, I wouldn't be here today. You'd be meeting me in the crack house at 2 a.m.
The Russians have dropped a nuke on the dam. Bloody hell.
Well, yeah, dropping it, that's the least of our problems at that point. Anyways. Meghan goes on to say, finally, I got some medication to help me with my anxiety, and it looked up from there. And good for you, Meghan. The apartment's energy was clearer and brighter than the townhouse, despite these hard times. I was glad to believe it wasn't haunted. Until one night. My room is situated right next to the front door, and only a few paces away from the kitchen, and I shared a wall with the kitchen. That'll be important later. As I got up one night to go to the bathroom, I walked by the kitchen and jumped when I saw a figure standing at the sink facing me. The figure wore a long dress, pink in color, but I could barely make it out since her face and half her torso were shrouded in darkness. I blinked, and she was gone. Later that summer, I was staying up a bit later into the night and was in the bathroom. I was looking for something in the cabinet when I heard the slightest teetering noise, as if someone was tapping plates together on the other side of the wall. I didn't think anything of it at first, but when it kept persisting after I had initially brushed it off, I left my room to see what was making that noise. My parents had long since been asleep. A lamp was on by the front door, something we'd recently started leaving on. My cat was afraid of the dark and would always screech when she realized she was alone at night, Yeah, Chewy does that too now. And through its illumination, I could see 2 plates sitting on the kitchen counter, shaking. I stared at it for a couple seconds to see if it would stop and honestly to see if I was just imagining it. But the shaking didn't stop. I reached over and touched the plate to stop it from shaking against the other. I waited to see if anything would happen. I'm not sure what or who I was waiting for, but after about a minute or so, I went back into my room and eventually fell asleep. I didn't hear anything like that again. One night, me and my mom were watching TV and we took a break to use the bathroom and to get snacks. I used the bathroom adjoining my room and closed my bedroom door. I was washing my hands when I heard my mom call for me on the other side of my door. I called back to her to tell her I was coming out. I opened my door and fully expected to see my mother. There was nothing. I went to the kitchen to see if she had called for me, and then went back to making snacks, but the light was on in the bathroom adjoining the kitchen. When she came out, I asked if she had called for me when I was in the bathroom. My mom shook her head, saying that she had been in the bathroom too this whole time. I then told her how I heard her exact voice calling me on the other side of my door. My mom gave me a look, and I knew. Maybe this place was haunted too.
About 1.5 years after I left high school, I received my GED diploma, and my parents wanted me to go to the local community college. But at that time, we lived paycheck to paycheck with no savings. There was no money for college in my mind, so I decided I wanted to get a job. I was fortunate enough to get the second job I applied for, and it was a part-time position at a popular upscale grocery store here on the East Coast. The store also happened to be situated right across from a state-of-the-art hospital. My first day on the job, I heard a ghost story. The woman who I replaced had quit on the spot because of a ghost. You can imagine my internal screaming upon hearing this. I worked in the deli department, and we shared a walk-in cooler with the cheese department, which was situated right behind us through the cooler. The cooler, on the deli side, had all the cold cuts, processed cheeses, and cured Italian meats that you could ask for. My co-workers said that whenever the woman went to the cooler, £5 cheese blocks.
The weirdest things just get you. I never know what to expect. So this one, it's the ghost wagging cheese at someone's head.
Whew. My co-workers said that whenever the woman went into the cooler, £5 cheese blocks would fly at her head, shooting out from the shelves. It would only happen to her, and my fellow deli clerks would laugh at the prospect of flying cheeses at her head. And I'm with them, I have to say. They obviously had not believed anything she had said when she voiced her concerns, and I wondered what she did to piss off the ghost, since this woman had been singled out. I sighed, and the first time I went into the cooler, I made sure that whatever ghost was in there knew I meant no harm, and I wanted no trouble. No cheese ever flew at my head, but one thing became clear in the short amount of time. That store was haunted. One night, during a closing shift, I was bent over the 3-bay sink, scrubbing the dishes clean of double-smoked ham and honey turkey, when the energy in the back room shifted. It was instant, and it caused my head to snap up. I slowly turned my head to the right. There, he was beside me, leaning over the sink in the same way I was, wearing a curious expression. It was a young boy, perhaps 10 or 11, wearing a t-shirt and some jeans. Before I could say anything, he vanished as quickly as he had appeared. After that, I started to see customers out of the corner of my eyes looking at our deli cases. I would perk up and say in my best customer service voice, "How can I help you?" only to see no one there. It happened so often that my co-workers would start to laugh and joke with me that I needed to stop working the long hours and I needed some sleep. I played along, but I wondered if they were spirits just wandering around looking about things, or perhaps they had migrated across from the hospital over the street. It was a regular occurrence to see vanishing images on the stairwells, in the break room, and around the deli department. One Halloween morning, I had the early morning shift. I was in my lift. My area was a public transportation ghost town, full pun intended, and I never learned how to drive since I left high school before I could learn. Do they teach you at school in America?
I don't know. They certainly don't in Canada.
They don't here either. They just throw us on the road at 17 and say, Don't crash.
We saw how well that works out. I mean, I wish they would tell the Americans don't crash when they throw them in the car.
Suddenly, my driver stopped in the middle of the road between the highway and the exit that he needed to be taken to get to my workplace. I stopped my music and asked her, "What's wrong?" As it was 5 a.m, there was no one on the road at that time. It was in a poorly lit area shrouded by trees.
Cheese,
Gromit. It was a poorly lit area shrouded by trees and overgrown bushes that lined the sides of the road. My driver showed me her GPS from her Lyft app. I know the way to store. I go there all the time, but it's just weird. My GPS wants to take me somewhere in DC. I looked at the map and I can vaguely remember a much longer route to this mysterious destination 40 minutes away, whilst the drive to the store was less than 5 minutes from our current place on the road. I thought it strange, and my driver took the exit towards the store and dropped me off. All I remember later about that day was the chaos. It was nothing like I'd ever experienced on Halloween. On a shelf on the back wall that showcased all the cold cuts and cheeses, smoked turkeys flew off the shelf. We gasped and I looked at my team leader. That turkey was heavy, and the amount of force it would have taken to throw that thing nearly outside of the department would be major. The cabinets storing our utensils and extra pans opened and closed by themselves, frustrating my team leader, who kept closing them, only for them to reopen when she wasn't looking. The store that day had a chaotic, frantic energy to it, and I was so glad to leave at the end of my shift. Nothing too insane happened after that, just the usual vanishing figures. I spent 4 years at that location in Virginia and eventually gathered up the courage and the financial means to relocate within the company to a full-time position in their finance office in their store at Brooklyn, New York. I got the job, and as I was off to fulfill my earliest childhood dream of moving to New York City, tragedy struck. In the last 2 weeks before I officially moved, I received a sudden news that a dear friend of mine, who had trained me and who I worked many shifts with in the deli, was in the hospital with only days to live. She'd just retired about a year prior, and she would often visit the store and say hello to all of us. She was a joy to be around, and we shared lots of laughs together. It was a shock, and I made plans to see her at the hospital the next day. That day when I got home from work, I was emotionally exhausted. I showered and I went to take a nap. I woke up around 8 o'clock at night and ate my dinner in my room. I just wanted to be alone. I was upset, thinking about my friend, when the energy in my room shifted. I was sitting in an armchair at the corner of my room that faced the bathroom. I looked up. A white figure stood next to my bathroom sink. Then as quickly as I had looked up, it shot up into the ceiling, and the regular energy returned to my room once more. I burst into tears knowing that the white figure had been my friend stopping to say her goodbyes. The next morning, I learned that my friend had passed away during the night.
I mean, that is so sad, Meghan. But I guess it's nice that, if nothing else, you got to say goodbye. That's more than most of us get, I suppose.
And she clearly thought enough of you to pop in and say goodbye.
Yeah. I was thinking, too, about the GPS thing. I thought that was interesting, because I actually had something like that happen recently I went to Kitchener to go see a movie. And usually I'm kind of used to the route. I still use GPS because I'm still learning the area. But I was talking to Nick on the phone as I was driving. And for whatever reason, the GPS, I don't know where the hell it was sending me. I assumed it was, taking me to the movie theater I was going to. But after a while, I kept hitting all these closed roads. And finally, I thought, okay, well, I don't know what the hell's going on. So I turned the map off, put it back on, set it to the Apollo, which was where I was headed. And then it completely took me back the way I'd come, back onto the highway. So I got back on the highway and, got to the theater, parked the car. But when I looked at afterwards, after, I parked, I looked at the map and it just took me into this completely unrelated neighborhood on the other side of the highway and just drove me around in a circle. And I have absolutely no idea why. And I've had issues like that with GPS before, and I understand, like, it's technology. Technology is fallible. But sometimes you do wonder what exactly is going on here.
Do you have those people in Canada like we have here in the UK who will follow their GPS overriding all their other sensors until they like drive into the river and go, well, my GPS told me to go this way. There's a river there, mate.
Yes.
Did you think the GPS made you a boat?
Yeah, we definitely have those here. I mean, and I think it's only getting worse. I mean, I was listening to Cognitive Dissonance today, actually. They do a fun episode for patrons, and there was a story. I don't know how fun this is, but they did a story about a guy who turned on the autopilot mode in his Tesla and thought that meant that he didn't have to pay attention to the road. So he just pulled out his phone, started dicking around with his phone, and he ran someone over. Yeah. Because as I understand it, the autopilot in Tesla is basically like lane assist. You know, it's sort of it's cruise control and lane assist, but it's not self-driving. And even the self-driving, like the safety record for those things is not awesome. But yeah, this dumb bastard turned on the autopilot and thought, well, I guess I'm just going to see what's new on the TikTok, and took someone's life from this earth. So yeah, again, as technology grows, I mean, look at all this AI shit. Look at all the boobery that's happened with AI generated art. It's only going to get worse. Anything that allows you to automate a process past a certain point is going to produce laziness and stupidity.
Well, I suppose, I mean, it's not the strangest story I've heard this week. You've got that 4-year-old girl in North Carolina, is it? Who kept telling her parents there was a monster living in a closet, and they didn't believe her. And then they heard a funny noise, so they called in pest control, and what they've discovered is the gigantic hive behind the wall in the closet. They reckon there was 50,000 bees in it.
Oh, shit.
And that was the noise. It was them humming.
That is far more frightening than any cryptid.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. That was last week, I think, that.
Oh, you know what? I think I saw that because there's like a thermal picture.
Yeah.
They took like a thermal snapshot and the wall. Yeah.
Because at first they thought there was somebody in there. They thought it was a person. It was that big a hive.
I think I would actually prefer the Frogger at this point to man-sized beehive.
Or man-sized bees.
Or man. Well, that's a whole other conversation. I was talking to my mom about this actually, and she was saying like, oh, these bees, I swatting at them. I'm like, don't swat at the bees for Christ's sakes. You know, we're running out of those goddamn things. And she said, oh, they're doing this thing in town, no mow May, where you're not supposed to mow your lawn for the month of May to let the flowers grow so the pollinators can get at them. She said, I'm not doing that shit. I fucking hate bees. And just mowed the lawn.
You hate bees.
Well, yeah, right? What functionally, what
I
have bees
hate
done?
living. I want us to die a slow death.
Yeah, right? Give me some of those neocotinoid pesticides, the ones that really, really fuck with bees. I'm just going to spray everything. I'm going to spray it under my arms. It's the weirdest vendetta to have. I could see wasps, sure. You know? And she says, well, a bumblebee stung me once. I said, okay, what did you do to it? Well, I picked up the flower it was on. I didn't realize it was in there. Well, it defended itself, man. That's what they do. I hit a guy with a 2x4 and he got really mad at me. You know? Oh, did he? Huh. What a bastard.
Yeah, I have to keep an eye on her. If she's near any apiaries, she's not like lobbing dynamite at him when she's driving past and stuff, is she?
Watch this space, folks, for the continued war of Bren's mom against the bees, I guess.
Like John Matrix with his bazooka.
It's not impossible.
Buzz off.
I was trying to think of something. I was like, oh, fuck, I need a bee pun. Nope, you got there.
Oh, don't worry, I'm just pulling your leg.
Oh, I've had about enough. That's all I got. That's all my. I was gonna say pun juice. Maybe not the best way to put this, but that's all my pun juice. I don't know, Paul. Jesus,
I'm going to call the police if you use that term again. Get me the number of the Mounties right now.
All right, we are going to take a quick ad break and then be right back with more of Meghan's story. If that wasn't enough, my cat that I'd had for 18 years got sick fast. I begged my dad to take her to the veterinary hospital. She wasn't eating or drinking and was hiding under tables and tablecloths, emitting low moans that broke my heart. So sorry. I know what that's like. That's tough. Since the vet cost a lot of money, my dad was hesitant to take her simply because he didn't have the funds. The night before she died, my cat limped her way into my room, sitting next to me as I ate dinner. She slept in my room on her last night. The next day, my dad came home from work to me bawling my eyes out. I was holding my cat, who I had dragged out from underneath the dining table. She hadn't eaten or drank anything that day. My parents put my cat into her carrier, and I gave my dad my card and told him to use whatever money he needed to get her better. Even though that was my moving money, I didn't care. Because it was the middle of COVID, only one person at a time was allowed inside the vet with their pet, tears straining his voice as he told me they recommended putting her down. I burst into tears and called my mom into the living room. When my dad came home, he handed me her blanket that was in her cat carrier, and I cried all night. Everything about the situation was horrible, and it broke my heart that my dad was alone when my cat passed away. That night, I had a dream that my cat came into my room and jumped up on my bed and slept with me. In the dream, I was surprised because she hadn't been able to jump on my bed by herself in a long time. When I woke up, I cried and wondered if her spirit had come back one last time to comfort me. At least I like to think that was the case. Months later, when I was in the city, my parents received her ashes and paw print impressions. This was one of the worst experiences I've ever had with death. When I visit my parents, sometimes I think I see her zooming around the way she used to, out of the corner of my eye. Oh, Meghan, yeah, that's hard. I'm sorry. I know one of our cats is, our younger cat actually, is having some health issues as he gets older, and it's difficult to watch them. Yeah. Moving to the city was a huge personal adjustment, and I had a lot of growing pains and growing up to do. But one of the biggest changes that I immediately noticed was the uptick of paranormal activity I was noticing. I just chalked it up to being in the big city with lots of different energies that I had never been exposed to before. That all changed when my sister and I decided to take the long way to a friend's apartment. We had been walking for a couple minutes on a busy avenue filled with restaurants and shops, then turned off into a suburban area that was quiet and still. As we walked, a heavy, dreadful feeling weighed on me the deeper we went into the neighborhood. It was awful, and I looked around at the houses on each side of the street. Overall, it was a sad feeling that kept getting stronger until I couldn't take it anymore. I told my sister, "This street is so sad. There's so much dread here. It's awful." My sister snapped her head and looked at me. This is the moment I told her all the different energies I'd been picking up on since moving to the city. I was seeing more ghosts, sensing different energies from objects and from people, and my gut feeling, my intuition, was louder than ever before. My sister said, "Makes sense. All the water we live around and your commute is mostly underground and underwater. Could be all that exposure to one of the main conduits of energy." I was shocked at her answer. She sounded so matter-of-fact, but it made sense. She then went on to tell me that the sad and dreadful feeling from the neighborhood we were walking in could be from a recent flood that swept through. It had taken lives, damaged numerous buildings, and had displaced some tenants as well. This was the first major instance of noticing the shift from just seeing ghosts from time to time to reading energies of my surroundings. And it wouldn't be the last. One night, me and my sister were walking to dinner. It was trash night for the street we were on, and as we passed bags and random pieces of furniture on the curb, something caught my eye. It was an old-fashioned fainting couch of some sort. I watched it as we passed by, and the moment I had walked by the couch, my body lit up with goosebumps. I was tingling all over, and I couldn't get away fast enough. I jogged a bit ahead of my sister, who told me to wait up. One thing I knew for certain was that something bad had happened on that couch. In addition to the goosebumps, it had given me such a dark feeling. I didn't want it to follow me or latch onto me in any way, and that's why I walked a bit faster just so we could get away from it. I told my sister what had happened, and she gasped and told me she thought it was cool I could pick up on stuff like that. I just hoped that no one picked up that couch but sanitation. I couldn't imagine that energy being in a home.
At work, I was flourishing. I was making friends and enjoying the new experience of working and living in New York City. My training in the finance office was going well, and once I had mastered the mid-shift, I was ready to be trained on how to close. When I arrived in the afternoon for my first closing shift, my friends in the office shared with me that at night, when you're alone closing, since that was often the case with a closing shift, there was a ghost that liked to play pranks in the office. I just stared at them. Cue more internal screaming. I had never been alone in the office before, and I would always have a trainer with me until I got the hang of how to do things myself. Well, the time came for me to start doing solo closings, and I was hoping that they had just been pulling my leg about this office ghost. Again, I was wrong. Since the office I worked in dealt with money, there were 2 security checkpoints you had to pass in just to get in entry. Both required facial recognition that had to be approved by corporate security, so not just anyone could waltz into the office. There was a facial scanner on the outside door, and one inside the alcove where we put our bags and such. One night I was at the computer working on an Excel spreadsheet when the in-office camera started going off. I looked closer, and the one that was on the fritz was the camera that was pointed to the alcove just outside the office. It was dark, which made sense since the lights in the alcove were motion sensors and only came on, well, when motion was sensed. Despite the darkness, the facial scanner kept lighting up, which it only ever did when it sensed movement in front of it. I watched the camera as it lit up blue and tried to scan whatever was in front of it. I looked back to my computer wondering why the ghost was trying to scan its way into the office when it could just walk through the wall. Again, if the ghost was a prankster, it could have just been trying to creep me out, who knows? It wasn't until a closing shift a bit later that I was fully spooked by this prankster spirit. One night I was on my dinner break in the office. I was listening to a true crime podcast when suddenly something on the other side of the office flew off the cabinet and landed in the middle of the floor. I froze mid-chew and stood up slowly to better investigate what had flown off the cabinet. It was the black wallet that we used to punch in the maintenance crew when they arrived and closed out their shifts. This black wallet is filled with a metal circuit. It's probably a good 3 to 4 pounds in weight. I picked it up and placed it back on its perch on the cabinet. I finished my meal and went back to work, keeping an eye on things. For the rest of my closing shifts, minor things would happen, like pens and pencils being tossed around on the counter or the floor. Or nothing would happen at all. It wasn't anything dark, and it didn't feel particularly spooky or menacing. It just felt that sometimes I wasn't alone. A couple of months later, I got promoted and I left that office. But I wonder if that ghost is still there. I'm now a department manager, and if I thought I wasn't going to come across any more ghosts, well, I was wrong. The store that I work out of is surrounded by water, with a river being only a 10-minute walk. Whenever we have heavy rains, the parking lot floods, and so will some parts of the store. It still makes me wonder about my sister's water theory. One night in my department, I was working late and pulling a long shift. We'd a big corporate visit the next day, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for them. Some products in my department have stickers, and I'd just finished using a couple of rolls and I'd put them back in the sticker cabinet. I went back to working when suddenly I heard a couple of thumps. I turned around and saw that the sticker rolls I'd just used were now strewn across the floor on the other side of the department. My department isn't that big, but it would still take some force to move those stickers to the other side. I picked the stickers back up and put them back in their places, too tired to care if they fell or were thrown again. I told myself that they had just fallen. Maybe I'd put them back weirdly and they just weren't stable. I was now second-guessing myself. I suppose it's my way of fact-checking my experiences. I brushed it off, telling myself there weren't any ghosts around. My walk-in cooler door has a window in the middle of it, and whenever I'm in the back room, I tend to look in the cooler. It's a force of habit. One day, I happened to look through the window and see one of my team members all the way in the back looking for something. I opened the door and began to talk to them when I realised there was no one there. Often, whenever I pass by the door or just happen to look in, I almost always see a figure in the same spot at the back, and then it always vanishes just as quickly as I happen to see it. Another day, I was walking into the back room when another manager was using a machine to grab a pallet down from a shelf high up. It's a safety policy that no one may walk past this machine or under it whatsoever until the machine has put the pallet on the ground. So it's me and a few others waiting for the pallet to come down when someone bumps into my shoulder behind me. I say sorry and turn my head to my right to see who was coming up behind me, and there was nobody there. I turned completely around to see if anyone was perhaps on the other side of me, or maybe standing a few paces behind. Still no one there. Once that pallet was safely on the ground, I booked it all the way back to my department.
Just briefly, I do think there is a lot of merit to the water theory. I'm not going to pretend to know why, but that's something I've kind of come to realize over the years is there does seem to be a real connection between this kind of stuff and water. I don't know about necessarily sensitizing you to it, but I mean, who knows? I mean, we have no idea of the mechanics by which these things work, so that's entirely possible.
Absolutely. I'm a big theory that there's a lot of connection to hauntings with water.
Yeah. I know, I've said this before, but I mean, when we moved, and actually I was just talking about this last night with Soraya, I was saying that when we moved from the first Ghost Story Guys studio, which was in my old office, and we started renting jam band space because at the time my house wasn't really set up for it. The one location was really, it was a jam band studio up next to a bar on the second floor of this little mini mall here in Victoria. And most of the time it was fine, but we would always get kind of stuck with the evening slots just because that's all that was available. And I remember it past a certain point, once, if the bar was not open that day or if it was closed, if we were whatever, there was a real sense of activity and pressure. And I think it was maybe the second or third time we were there, we noticed that a stream ran right behind this place. And I don't think it's a coincidence because that whole area feels hinky. And when I realized that a stream cut through it, I thought, I feel like that's related. Again, I'm not going to pretend to know how or why, but I did feel like there was a connection there. And I know Revelstoke, I think I said this before, but I learned a couple of years ago that Revelstoke's actually crisscrossed with underground streams. And of course, that place is, that's a hotbed of weird shit.
Yeah, because it's one of those weird things about London that a lot of people don't realise is that there are 20 rivers that run underneath the city.
I didn't know that.
There's the Thames, I think the Brent, and there's another one. There's only 3 rivers in London that actually are fully above ground. All the others are forced underneath it. They've just been subjugated to remove them from the streets, and their original courses have been built on.
Oh, fascinating. I mean, this is going to be a dumb question, but, bear with me. Are there a lot, aside from the historical stories that we know about, the stuff that everyone talks about, are there stories of haunting in London, or is it like New York where the noise seems to drown it out?
I think what tends to happen is a lot of central London isn't residential. It's business and finance,
right,
and
of
shops
course,
and museums and stuff. But, I mean, there are numerous cases of hauntings in and around London in the areas, where most of the population are. And then you've got the weird, not just the Tower of London and the palaces, you've got, the alleged ghosts at the British Museum, you've got the haunted bus story, you've got ghosts wandering around parks, people seeing strange characters all over the place.
Okay, so there are stories like this. It's not just, again, because most of the stories I hear from London are famous stories, Jack the Ripper associated or royal family associated. I don't hear a lot of the kind of stories we tell on this show. I don't tend to hear a lot of stories like that about London. So I was curious.
Yeah. Oh, the ghost bear.
Okay, now you got to tell me about the ghost bear.
The ghost bear that terrified a beefeater in the Tower of London. He was so frightened it had approached him to attack him, and he stabbed it with his bayonet, and it went into the wall and broke it, and then he fainted. But yeah, the Tower of London's supposed to got the ghost of a bear that wanders around because that's where the king used to keep his zoo.
No kidding. Imagine how pants-shittingly scary that would be. There's a bear, you try to stab it, it doesn't work.
There was a king that had a pet polar bear. He used to have it on a chain and let it swim in the Thames.
What the fuck? You guys and zoos and subjugating
which
things.
Which king was that? We rule the world, now the animals.
That's exactly it. Like Nick is taking this really cool vacation in September. She's going to South Africa to this train hotel down there. I think it's called Kruger Shalati. She saw it on that Eugene Levy show, The Reluctant Traveler. So she's been saving for 2 years to go to this place. But she loves going to South Africa. Yeah, she's been a couple times now. And I said, what? This is just like an English desire to reclaim the colonies. That's all this is. You guys you want to put on your pith helmet and go spread the gospel of Britain. So this is a shared British trait I'm learning.
We just like to visit places and keep them.
You know how you go on vacation and you buy a souvenir? Well, we take the whole country.
Exactly. What could remind you more of how much you enjoy that particular part of the world than owning it? I think it's only fair. And look what we've done. Everybody's much better off.
Yeah, I feel like Britain, look what we've done. That's another t-shirt. We can sell that alongside the Pun Juice t-shirts.
They all enjoy Only Fools and Horses, Monty Python.
You're welcome, the world.
Yeah. Thanks for nothing, world.
That's another t-shirt. Thanks for nothing, world.
Wait till we get to space.
Then the sun will truly never set on the British Empire.
Never has.
You guys can be all part of that same man mission that I was talking about. Get in, lads. We got Lager and Katie Price in there. Get in.
Oh, God. Can't think of two worse reasons to get in anywhere.
But think the kind of people who would get in are the ones we want to send on that expedition.
Yeah, that's a good point.
See? Always thinking. You colonize, I'll scheme. We got a good division of labor here at the Ghost Story Guys. All right, so we're going to take one last ad break, and we will be back with the conclusion of Meghan's story. Early in the morning, I was headed out for my opening shift. I was putting my shoes on in the foyer. I turned my head towards a linen closet when, at that moment, I saw a full figure, white and shimmering, run from the linen closet all the way across the living room and into the wall. There is nothing on that side of the wall but a staircase leading outside. I froze. My whole body was prickling with goosebumps for a good minute and a half after that happened. Until that point, there had been no signs of activity in my apartment. I sighed, hoping this was a one-time occurrence. A couple months later, I was laying in my bed and trying to go to sleep when, clear as day, at the foot of my bed, a woman called my name. "Meghan," she'd said. I did my best to remain calm as if I'd simply not heard her. A couple minutes later, I hurried out of my bedroom and told my sister what had happened. She tried to calm me down, and I sat in the living room with the lights on for about half an hour before returning to bed. I slept with my string lights on that night. The next morning, I thought about why that had scared me so bad. And then it clicked. It reminded me of when I used to hear my name at the townhouse at 1926 Crossbow Court. I was worried it was starting to happen again. Nothing much happened after that, and to this day I still see some things out of the corner of my eye, but I think they may just be passing through. One Sunday, I finally had the day off and wanted to enjoy the day with my sister since we had opposite schedules for a while and didn't really see much of each other. We went to church, grabbed coffee and bagels, and started to walk around the neighborhood. There was a new record shop that my sister wanted to go to. It had just opened, and she was eager to look inside and support a small local business. The only downside, she said, was that it doubled as an antique shop. I grimaced. I really did not feel comfortable going to an antique shop, and she said she understood if I didn't want to go with her. I didn't want my fear or hesitancies to stop me from spending time with her, and I didn't know when I'd get another Sunday off, so I went. As soon as we entered the shop, I was hit with a wall of energy. The antique shop was in the front, and in the back, the vinyl records. It was like entering a busy coffee shop, several voices chatting away at different speeds and at different times. I looked around despite this and did my best to stay calm. My sister made a beeline for the records, and when I went to join her, I stopped. Much like Pat's Hall of Statues at the big house, I felt there was an invisible barrier between the antiques and records side of the shop. I did not feel welcome to pass through it all, but the antique side was getting more intense, and I was getting antsy and hyped up all at the same time. I told my sister that I would wait outside for her, and she nodded. We visited the record store together multiple times after that, and it was always the same feeling when I tried to join her on the record side. It was always this barrier that prohibited me from entering. I would stare at that side of the store and try to see if there was some object back there that perhaps was holding all the energy that made me feel unwelcome on the record side. My sister became fast friends with the owner and loved to talk about records, and I wanted to ask him so badly about the history of the place or if he had anything super old that might be holding a lot of energy. One day I was fed up. I was tired of not being able to join my sister on that side of the store, especially since the antiques had been so loud. It's gotten a lot better with them, though. I can stay in the store longer without getting hyped up or anxious. Anyways, I was fed up and decided to step into the record side. I passed through the barrier, which was gelatin-like, and gave me a very heavy feeling inside my stomach and shoulders, as if I was being weighed down with stones. On the other side, the energy was completely different. There was no chatter and no busy energy like there was on the antique side. I was fine. Now that I was over the threshold, I stood with my sister as she thumbed through the stacks and was able to get a closer look in the back. I made my way around and got as close to the back room as I could. The owner's desk and checkout were right next to the back of the shop, and I smiled at the owner as I tried to clandestinely investigate my surroundings. As I scanned, I saw hanging up on the ceiling are a bunch of wooden kayaks, posters, and then a door. I squinted. There was a random door behind the owner's desk. As I got closer, I realized it was just a door. A wall was behind it, and there were no door frames inside the shop whatsoever, excluding the front door. This door was different and didn't fit into the shape, if you will, of the store. It's as if the store has a circle energy and the store in the back has square energy. I haven't been back to ask the owner any questions about the history of the shop or the door. Frankly, I'm not sure if I ever will, because what if he says yes and that he's noticed activity and was looking for someone to help him? It's not like I'm a medium that can talk to spirits and help him with my connections from the other side. I'm just a metal detector. I can tell him something's there, but that's really the extent of it. I would love to hear your thoughts about this, since I'm a little conflicted about bringing up the subject with the shop owner. There's a little more to Meghan's story, and we will finish that, but I just want to say that's a tough conversation to have. I don't think you have to worry about him wanting you to help fix it. I think that's probably an anxious thought. I think it's worth asking about the door and just say, hey, that's a cool door. What's the story there? And no doubt, if he runs a record shop, he's going to want to tell you the story. But it might be tough to have the conversation about energy or activity. That again, without the other person bringing it up, that can be difficult. I mean, you can always say, hey, this place seems pretty old. There must be some great ghost stories from here. Just kind of breach the subject that way. But I have learned, and actually I have been forbidden by Nikki from opening conversations with anything to do with energy. Because I remember one time we heard these really intense sounds coming from upstairs. And we realized it was before the new residents had moved in. So we don't know what the hell it was. But I remember we were talking about it afterwards, and I said, once the new people actually moved in, I said, hey, we should ask them if they've noticed anything weird going on up there. And she looked at me and said, no, you're not going to do that. And Nick is not the kind of person she's not the kind of person to be like, you can't do this. But this was a rare occasion. She said, no. We are not having that conversation with our neighbors apropos of nothing. And knowing what I do now about our neighbors, they're nice people, but I don't think that would have been a welcome conversation. All right, so this is the conclusion of Meghan's story. Meghan says, that's the full story up until now, at least. Thank you for reading. It means a lot to be taken seriously and without judgment. Regarding 1926 Crossbow Court, I do want to share a tidbit. I recently looked it up online to see what came of it, and boy did they give this place the works. When my family left, it was decrepit and falling apart. We had to live with a fucking hole in the wall that leaked water and black mold every time someone showered, and our landlord didn't do a damn thing. But after we left, they gave this place the works. New and expensive everything. I'm talking granite, new carpets, stainless steel refrigerator. I mean, everything was expensive and new. But the only place they didn't have a photograph of on the realtor website? Yep, you guessed it, the right side of the basement. Zero pictures of any laundry rooms, storage rooms, or half-finished bathrooms. There's a picture of a new fireplace, but the other side of the basement that was extremely haunted, no pictures whatsoever. It makes me wonder. There are new tenants that live there now, and I wonder if there's any activity over there still. I mean, especially with that level of renovation. I'd be tempted to ask, but I really don't ever want to go back there. I think that's the right move, Meghan. I wouldn't bother. Leave that place in the past. In conclusion, thank you for reading. If anything else happens, I will definitely let you know. I'm really looking forward to your feedback and theories and general comments. I love your podcast and thank you for all the laughs and wonderful insight into all things paranormal. You guys rock, and I'll always be here to cheer you on. Well, Meghan, thank you so much for that incredible story that we managed to share across these two episodes. Really fantastic stuff. Your experience with a landlord, that is, as I'm sure you know, that is not unique. My friends were living in a place in Victoria, and the fridge never worked half the time. And someone else in that building, they were leaking so much there was actually mushrooms growing out of the carpet. And yeah, and then once the people left, because no one should be expected to live like that, they fix it all, they'd renovate it completely, and then charge 2.5 times the rent. So that's probably what's going on there, Meghan, is they probably put a bunch of money into it. Now he's charging 3 times what he was charging you guys because he's a parasite piece of garbage.
Say what you really think.
Nah, I don't like to judge. I'm just kidding. I love judging. I'm Italian. It's what I do. It's in my blood.
Mm-hmm. No, I just think it's a fabulous series of experiences over the years, and thank you very much for feeling comfortable enough to share it with us. I think there's more than one thing at play there. I wouldn't particularly say I'm a big fan of haunted people. I think the townhouse situation, I think there's a lot of energy there that was ripe for something to feed on, with everything that was going on with the family dynamic and the problems and the situations and the sacrifices that people were making just to live. But I think after that, I think Meghan may have just attuned herself to the other side, and that's why it seems to follow her wherever she goes.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Is it a matter of following her, or do you think she's just able to tune in
I think
to things that are already there?
Tuned in.
Yeah.
Like a paranormal radio. I think despite all the challenges Meghan's faced, I think she's attuned herself to be quite the talent.
I think so too.
And good for her.
Absolutely. So thank you again, Meghan. And if you have a story you want to share, we would love to tell it here on the show. We already have another set of listener stories lined up for next episode. And again, we're always looking for more stories. Send it to ghoststoryguys@gmail.com. And we are going to take a quick break, then be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope, and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now, and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123, or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you, and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. Thanks again to Meghan for sharing her story across these last 2 episodes. The Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps find our stories. He's also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available everywhere fine podcasts live. Joseph Camo, who manages our YouTube account. He's also host of the Sociology Professor YouTube channel. Adam Lynch, who edits our video and is also the host of the Weekly Creep podcast with Dulce. Tanya Downing, who manages our Facebook community and assists with editing, and co-hosts the show Streaming into Madness with Walter Whitaker. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community.
Our paranormal paratrooper, entering from the skies above as Mr. Brennan Storr.
Okay, I'll take it. And of course, my friend and co-host, the one, the only, the inimitable, Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I have the marvellous Penny Griffiths-Morgan joining me, talking about the haunted history of Britain and some certain locations as we dive into that. And a good old chinwag we had. She'd had a late day at work, and I thought she'd humour me as best we could, and we ended up talking for nearly 3 hours. But don't fear, the episode is not nearly 3 hours long. It's just a bit shy of under 2 hours, but it's a nice old natter. And then I've got the marvellous return of Mr. Lyle Blackburn.
Very cool. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms and all good podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm Largely the Truth on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. And you can find my other show, Weird Together, where Professor Joseph Camo and I talk about the sociology behind the latest and greatest in independent horror films, everywhere fine podcasts live. As we said at the top, this show exists solely thanks to our patrons. Again, ads, you make a little bit of money from ads, nothing crazy, it's inconstant, you can't rely on it. So patrons really are the folks who make this possible. And so thank you to everyone who supports us. And again, if you'd like to support the show, we would deeply appreciate it. Head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. You get early access to ad-free episodes, bonus conversations between me and Paul, episodes of Host Adventures where I kind of talk about what's going on with me and, my random musings. There's also monthly live streams. And at the $20 level and above, you get a shout out in every second story show. So there's lots of cool stuff. And again, you'll find all of that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or by signing up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts. And with Apple Podcasts, you get pretty much everything there except the live show. There's no way yet for us to share that with Apple Podcast subscribers. But again, that's at a higher price point anyways with Patreon. So, you're not losing out on anything with Apple Podcasts. Again, it's, if you are only familiar with that ecosystem, it's actually a really useful way to get all the extra stuff without having to futz around with Patreon, which is their app can be frustrating. And it works. And hey, we would like you to sign up. But if you don't want to deal with the Patreon ecosystem, Apple Podcasts is the way to go. Paul, my friend, do you have any guest spots coming up?
Nothing lined up at the moment. I have some in the pipeline, but nothing confirmed as I power through several interviews, so I can have a couple of weeks free to watch lots of football next month.
Of course. As I mentioned, I was recently a guest on 2 episodes of Where Did the Road Go? The first one should be coming out, I think, by the time this episode drops. The second one, I think, the week after that. Again, those are probably about 2 hours each. And it was a great time. Had a great chat with Soraya. We had never met before, but we got on with like a house on fire. So I think those will be a good listen for folks who are fans of this show. And if you like paranormal stuff in general, check out Where Did the Road Go? If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have t-shirts, stickers, mugs, all kinds of cool stuff. And if you do buy something, make sure to shoot us a picture. We love seeing you folks wearing our gear, and with your permission, we will post it up on our socials. If you like the music you hear in the show, make sure to check out the soundtracks to Ghost Story Guys Seasons 6 and 7, which are now streaming on Spotify, Apple Music, and I think Deezer, and is being slowly distributed to other platforms via our house label, Night Harvest Recordings. All those soundtracks are, of course, composed and performed by Rainy Days for Ghosts, which is a project of Harper Smith. Harper is a film composer and journalist who is based out of Central California, and if you like the music, you can hire Harper. She has done work for not only our show, but for feature films, short films, all kinds of cool stuff. And again, reach out to her at rainydaysforghosts@gmail.com. Our theme song, Radio Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music wherever you get your tunes. And I think that's going to do it.
Well, we'll be back next week, but until then,
into the darkness we go. I wish I could leave that in the show. I love that story so much.
Yeah, Dogpool is played by I think the current title holder of the world's ugliest dog.
Oh, no. I didn't know that was even a thing. That's terrible.
Yeah, so that's who Dogpool is in the film. He's in the latest trailer.
Okay, I haven't seen it yet. World's ugliest dog. Oh, Mr. Happy. Is that Mr. Happy Face?
I think so, yeah.
Scamp the Tramp. Oh, he's not that ugly. These dogs are not ugly. Okay, maybe Sweepy Rambo is a little bit... he looks a little like something conjured from hell. Peanut. Okay, yeah, Peanut, a 2014 winner. Also pretty ugly. Wally the Mutt is not unusually ugly. Mugly is, yeah. That dog looks like it has killed things. Yoda, I'm pretty sure, is some kind of guinea pig. Oh, wow. See, I feel like the Sam, the one that won from 2003 to 2005, he literally looks like he's walked out of Dead Alive. I don't know how you top that. I feel like you should just retire the award after that guy dies. I would absolutely watch Avengers Kang Dynasty if it was just you talking in that voice in Marbella. Just lay around in a pool like old Ray and Sexy Beast. Just...
All right, man. Fuck off. You nobbled my mate. I ain't having that. You're taking liberties, son.
There is a preponderance of samurai swords in the UK, and I don't know why.
It's to protect us from France and also the internet.
Protecting you from nearby shogunates, I think, would have been the appropriate response, but France works too.
All right, there's kendo training some.
Oh, you actually have kendo sticks. I dated a girl once. She had kendo sticks, and she'd always be like, let's go out in the field and play kendo sticks.
Spa.
I guess. I don't know how to do this. You just keep hitting me with the stick.
Really hurts if you get clipped by one.
Yeah, it sure goddamn does. I can speak to that from experience.